Well, hi there. It's Monday. Time for Monday Mastery. I'm author and dating coach Rick Soderbeer, and I'm glad to see you're all here today. And we'll just wait for a couple of seconds to build the audience just a little bit and rock and roll from there. It's one of my last days down in Foley, Alabama, just north of Gulf Shores, and it's been an awesome winter, and there's a group of us that have been hanging out together and cocktail hour at 4 o'clock, and I had to leave that a little bit early today to come and join you all. And so anyway, I hope you had a great week last week and an awesome weekend. And over the weekend, I was having a conversation with a coaching client of mine, and the idea of today's topic came up. Oh, by the way, let me know that you're here. Say hi or drop a note in the chat and let me know who's here and where you're at. So anyway, I was having a conversation with a coaching client of mine, and he was struggling with ending a toxic relationship. And it dawned on me that we only make... Hey, Addie, thanks for joining in. Addie's in the Kansas City area. We only make decisions based on two criteria. There's only two reasons that we make any decision, and that is either based on pleasure or on pain. Hey, Lisa, thanks for joining in. Glad you're here. Geneva, thanks for joining in. And we do things to either gain pleasure or avoid pain. And those, if you look at any decision you've ever made, it boils down to those two choices. When we look at our frustration or our anxiety of breaking up with someone, well, where is that anxiety coming from? Is it because you're going to feel pain of losing a relationship? Is it coming from the pain or the anxiety of having to have that conversation? Or is there some pleasure that you think you're still deriving from a toxic relationship? And it doesn't even have to be a toxic relationship. You may recognize that the person you're with, or the person... Hey, Kathy, thanks for joining in. The person you're with just isn't your soulmate, just doesn't have all your criteria, or they may be displaying a couple of your red flags. So it can be very difficult to leave an okay relationship, even when you recognize that it's not the exact relationship that you're looking for. And that's what we should all be looking for, is we should be looking for that extraordinary relationship, your soulmate relationship. It should be the bottom line, because anything less than that, you're settling. And in my conversation with my client this weekend, we came to the conclusion that this was a toxic relationship for him, and he's been struggling with that for some time. We've been talking about trying to cut his relationship ties with this person, with this woman, and he finally, after some coaching, some conversation, and he was just having anxiety about having that conversation. He doesn't like that kind of conversation, and most of us don't. Hey, Phil, thanks for joining in. Janny, thanks. Glad to see you're here. So these are really difficult conversations, but the sooner you have them, when we're talking about ending a relationship, the sooner you have them, the easier it is. The less stress you'll experience. And I know from a personal fact, I have great anxiety when I have to have this conversation with someone, But when I do have the conversation, it's very stressful to me. But when it's over, it's like this huge weight is lifted off my shoulders. And I no longer have the pain of carrying that relationship around. In my conversation with my client this weekend, he was having just thinking about having to have a conversation, any conversation with this woman, was giving him anxiety. And whenever you have a relationship like that, or even a friendship like that, it's not a healthy relationship for you. If you have to think about, if you're starting to get all balled up inside, getting all anxious, it's time to walk away, because you're not getting any significant pleasure out of that relationship. And one of the things I've said for years is that the pain of leaving a relationship, regardless of how good or bad it is always worse than the pain of staying. At least if you're staying in a toxic relationship or a mediocre relationship, however, whatever it is, it's always easier to know the person that you're with than to face the uncertainties of starting all over again. Will I find somebody as good? Will I find somebody that will understand me? Will I find somebody that wants to be with me? There are a lot of what ifs in ending a relationship. But you have to step back and saying, am I really enjoying this relationship? What am I gaining from this relationship? Or what am I avoiding by leaving this relationship? Am I avoiding pain, or am I gaining pleasure? So these are questions that you really have to dig down deep for and think about. And if you go back to any of your other decisions that you've made, especially relationship decisions, what were those decisions based on? Was it based on the fact that you were trying to gain pleasure? And normally when we get into a relationship, that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for the pleasure of somebody's company. We're looking for the pleasure of being able to do something with somebody. We're looking for the pleasure of being able to have a conversation with someone that gets us. On the flip side, you can get into relationships for the wrong reasons. You can get into relationships for fear of being alone, for fear of missing out on events, or missing out on a relationship of whatever it is. So that induces, that's a pain inducer, and so many of us are, we just hate dealing with the pain of relationships, but that's all part of the dating process. And Geneva says, I'm not in a relationship, but I do have to have this conversation with someone I met. I hate that conversation too, but I did pull out my non-negotiable list. Awesome, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And I just would rather be friends with this person. And Geneva, that's the mature way to look at this. It can be difficult. And these conversations, they're more painful to us usually than to the other person. Now, if the other person is emotionally immature or emotionally damaged in some way, there may be some repercussions. I just had this conversation with a woman down here, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks ago, and she handled it very poorly and acted like she was in high school. It was like, really? Aren't we adults here? And so it's when you run into a situation like that, you have to take a look at it. And when somebody is unpleasant, or saying you don't know what you're missing, or you never gave me a chance, or whatever it is, all you're doing is recognizing or calling them out and pointing out or discovering that the relationship is not about you. It's about them and what they want. And a true relationship, a healthy relationship, is supposed to be one that benefits both of you. It enhances both of you. It can't be a one-sided. And when you find somebody that wants to argue that you shouldn't be breaking up, or tries to talk you back into staying after you've already decided to leave, that just shows that the relationship is all about them. And that's something that you all have to be prepared for when you have these tough conversations. But you have to remember ultimately that you're doing this to gain pleasure or to avoid the pain of being in a relationship. And Geneva says, and I would never want anyone to change for me, because we all know that misery, that's misery waiting to happen. That's exactly right. And in all relationships, there's such a funny thing. There's so many moving parts. And what so few people recognize is that all these things need to come together. I look at, and I've been doing some research and writing another blog post that'll be coming out later this week. But I'm looking at hanging on too long. I'm looking at the things we do to try to maintain relationships that aren't great. I just kind of lost my thought there. It's a senior moment. But anytime you're doing something to making a decision, it's about gaining pleasure or avoiding pain. And sometimes you do have to go through a certain level of pain in order to achieve your ultimate goal. And whether that goal is to end a relationship or to enter into a relationship, it doesn't make any difference. And this applies to virtually every other decision that you make, whether it's buying a car, taking a job, what breakfast cereal you buy. It's all a matter of avoiding pain or gaining pleasure. Going on a diet. For me, I always view that as painful. So whenever I don't diet, I'm avoiding the pain of dieting. And there are a number of other things that and it's virtually every decision is the same way. So what pleasures are you searching for, and what pleasures are you giving up? The whole idea is to create your best life, create your best relationship. And like Geneva says, she's just met someone, but if it's not a good fit and you see it quickly, which most of you that follow me should recognize by now when a relationship isn't a good fit. And it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're not a good match. I can't tell you how many people that I've met, how many women I've met that they're just wonderful women, but it's just not a good fit. It's not what I'm looking for. And I'm trying to share that with all of you, that you, unless you're choosing or making good choices, you're ultimately going to be unhappy in any relationship. Now, there's maybe a few of you in the audience that watch this that have had to have limited dating experience because you just stumbled onto the right relationship. That happens so rarely. I would venture a guess that happens probably less than 6 or the 5% of the time. The idea that you have to or that you should be able to find somebody in after dating just 5 or 6 people, what you're trying to do there is you're trying to avoid sometimes the pain of dating. But if you flip that around, it can be a great experience. You get to learn about yourself. You get to learn more of the things that you like, and some more things that you may not want in a relationship. It's all part of the dating process. So, if you guys have any questions or any other comments, please feel free to drop them in the comments section here. I'm more than happy to take your questions. And if you guys have experience of making these tough decisions, share that with us if you don't mind, because other people can learn from it. Not just those that are on the broadcast tonight, but those that watch it later. It's the old pleasure and pain principle. You're either trying to avoid one or gain the other, and obviously, or hopefully, in searching for the right relationship, you're looking for the pleasure of being with your extraordinary mate or your soulmate. At least you should be. And part of what I'm working on is changing the culture of dating, because no matter, and that goes back to what I started to mention about my blog that's coming up shortly, is you cannot fix a broken relationship. You cannot fix a broken marriage. All you're doing is fixing the symptoms. You're not fixing the underlying cause of those symptoms. And the underlying cause of most of those symptoms, with the exception of mental illness or physical or verbal abuse, and even some of that will fall into this category, is that you made a bad decision. You made a bad choice. Or you both made a bad choice. It's something that we all have to deal with. We have to look at. And the more work we do on the front end of a relationship, the less work we have to do on the back end. And for years, even when I was getting counseling in my marriage, I recognized that, wow, this shouldn't have to be this hard. And I've come to learn and recognize that it doesn't have to be this hard. It's just we have to make better choices up front. We have to do the hard work. We have to do the due diligence up front. It's not always fun, because there would be nothing more enjoyable to meet one or two people or half a dozen people and find the love of your life. It just doesn't happen that way. And by using a lot of the principles, and Geneva brought up one of them, using your deal breaker list, and then also using your must-have list, you can weed out a lot of people very quickly. You don't have to go on a lot of one-and-done dates. There will be quite a few, because when you finally meet someone and go out, there might not be a great connection. And if there's not a great connection, then okay, let's move on and find somebody else. And there's plenty of somebody else's. And for those of you in the Kansas City area, and these are the only statistics I have, there's about 800,000 singles in the Kansas City metro area. And when you start looking at that number of singles, and about half are men, half are women, there's a couple of percentage points difference between the two. But when you start looking at that number of people, that means there's a lot of people to date. And if you were to have, if we look at break those numbers down even further, if only I think I have to think back to my numbers. If only about 5% of those actually have what you're really looking for in a relationship, that leaves about 2,000 people in this is in the Kansas City metro area to date. And if you had 5 dates a week, it would take you about 7.5 years to go through that many dates. I guarantee you, you don't have to date that much. But it's one of those things that you have to be prepared to meet a lot of people. You just don't know where you're going to meet your soulmate. Are you going to meet them? Are you going to meet them in the grocery store? Are you going to meet them at a social event? And social events are always, especially casual social events, meetup groups, that type of thing. Those are always great places to meet. And you're going to meet a few strange people along the way, no doubt, no doubt. But then again, that's what your must-have and deal-breaker lists are for, and you have to have some of the tough conversations, because there are going to be, for lack of better terms, especially for the ladies, there's going to be those creepers out there that think that they're God's gift to women, and that you shouldn't. There's no reason you shouldn't want to be with them. It's obvious to everybody else, but not to them. So you need to take your time. You need to pay attention. You need to be active. And this is another good pleasure or pain principle type thing. When you have an opportunity to go out, what do you associate with going out? What a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I was planning on going out, but I just decided that I wanted to stay home." Well, was it because you wanted to avoid the pain of getting up, getting out, and getting dressed up and going out and having a good time? And most of the time, when we go out, at least for the people that I talk to, and I know for myself, when I force myself to go out, when other people force themselves to go out, they have a good time. It was just getting past that hurdle of the temporary pain that we associate with getting ready to go out. And Addie says, I have a question. Yes, it's always easiest to break it off with someone via text or phone call, but perhaps the right thing to perhaps the right thing to do. But when in person, they tend to want to know what they've done wrong, or how can they change. Blah blah blah. Is breaking it off not in person okay, or does it depend on how long you've dated? In person, you can't just tell them, sorry, this. Let's see, because I'm formulating an answer here, Addie. In person, you can't just tell them, sorry, this just isn't what I'm looking for, and it never ends without having to justify your decision. I'm going to challenge you there, Addie. Why can't you say that? Why can't you say that, yeah, this just isn't the relationship I'm looking for. I don't feel a connection here. You're a great guy, but it's just not a good fit for me. And I think that's an honest, true answer. If you're not feeling a connection, that's all the more definition you have to go into. You can say, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm just not feeling the chemistry here. And from an overall standpoint, I hate breaking up in text. It's, in my opinion, unless it's the absolute only way that you can, for fear of retribution or for your safety, it should be at least a phone call. But if you're on a date and deciding that, yeah, this just isn't the right relationship, I mean, you can do that on a first date. I mean, why not do it on a second, third, or 12th date? John, this really isn't working for me. I just don't feel a connection, and it's not the relationship I'm looking for. You're a great guy, and we can remain friends, but that's going to be about it. And you can just keep reverting back to those answers. No, you did nothing wrong. And if they keep badgering you or keep uh, pushing the issue, then you're starting to recognize that, yeah, it's not all about it. It's not about a relationship for the two of you. It's about what they want. And you can also say that, and just explain that a relationship for you has to be about both people. What's good for both of us. If it's only good for you, then it's not going to be good for me. And that may alleviate some of those questions. And Addie says, the men aren't abusive or anything. Nothing wrong with them, really, but just not what I feel is forever. And that's okay. And I'd rather not break up in text, but sometimes it's always easier to break up in text, Addie. And I've had that happen to me. And Addie says, use the phrase, it's not you, it's me. Well, to an extent, but you have to be a little more explicit than that. Saying, I'm just not feeling a connection here. I'm not feeling a relationship connection. It's not what I'm looking for in a relationship. And you're a great guy, but it's not the right relationship for me. And that's really all you need to say. And more times than not, they're going to say, okay, I understand. And then you just, this shouldn't be done at dinner. This should be done over cocktails or coffee. And, where you can walk away, you can start out, with some casual conversation, but at the end, you still need to step up and say, yeah, I need to move on. This is not the relationship I'm looking for. And Addie says, I've had a man try to commit suicide before, a couple of days after I broke it off. That's something I've worked through with therapy, but it does seem to always be in the back of my mind. Addie, I'm terribly sorry that happened to you, but that is not your fault. That is, you have no control over, and I'm sure your therapist has told you this, you have no control over what other people do or how they react. And, and sadly, some people are not emotionally healthy. And that is not something you have anything to do with. That's not anything that you that you can ever control. You cannot control what other people think. You can't control what other people do. You can't control what other people say. All you can do is control what you think, do, and say. That's not on you. And I'm hoping your therapist has helped you work through that, but that should be considered a rare case. And that, don't let those types of things stop you from making good decisions. And I know I'm probably going to get flack for this, but that's actually a bit of a selfish act, where they, and I've heard of this before, where they try to commit suicide and try to guilt you into coming back to them. And that's not any way to live. That's not a healthy way to treat somebody. And that's part of what you need to recognize, is they were not mentally or emotionally healthy to begin with. And I don't know how long you dated that person, but it's not your responsibility to fix them. You're not here to fix anybody, nor is anybody here to fix you or to change you or you to change them. This is all about making good decisions and what's right for you and what isn't. And only you can decide what's right for you and what isn't. And that's on all of us. We need to make those decisions. If it's not right, the best thing we can do is say, no, this isn't right for me, and I wish you all the best. Move on. And because then it also, the way you also can look at it, Addie, is that now the guy you may need to tell that he's not the right one, well, then he's not pursuing you any further, and he's free to pursue the right one for him. As opposed to living in hopes and for lack of better terms, fairy tales, that this is a relationship that will grow into something. Most relationships don't. We're just looking for that one relationship to come together with all the right pieces and all the right parts to make a healthy, long-lasting, extraordinary relationship or soulmate relationship. And it goes back to the Dating Made Simple Academy course. It's all about dating intentionally. And when you walk in, Addie, with that kind of attitude, and I believe you do, it makes it a little bit easier to have these conversations and move on a little bit more quickly. I'm hoping that helps. I see the heart emoji, so I'm hoping that's helping, and I'm hoping that's helping some of you others too. Let's see. I've currently started dating someone. So far, so good. Awesome. There you go. Very good. I'm glad to hear that, Addie. That's awesome. So if anybody else has questions or comments, I'm more than happy to work those out. And we'll just circle back to the original topic. Is these are things that are all decisions based on pleasure and pain. If the relationship or even just dating dating somebody more than a couple times isn't going to give you pleasure, let's not go there. And if you're not going to be excited about seeing this person again, then something's missing. Let's pay attention to those signs. We have to do this due diligence. We have to do this work on the front side, so we don't get caught up in a broken relationship later on, or a broken marriage later on that takes just an inordinate amount of effort to keep things together. And I'm never a proponent of getting a divorce, but if you're not if you made poor decisions on the front end, you got a hell of a lot of work to do on the back end, and that's not a lot of fun. That's not a lot of there's not a lot of pleasure in doing that, because there's always going to be something wrong. There's going to be an argument continually. So the whole idea is to make sure you make good decisions up front. Now, are there going to be situations that you start dating somebody and a year in something comes up that you say, yeah, no, that's a deal breaker, that you could never have foreseen or never could have guessed, and you just find a personality trait or characteristic that just doesn't work for you? Those happen. But when you start to getting into those kinds of that kind of time together, you start to see that or you should have recognized a lot of these things early on. And again, there may be some hidden personality trait or characteristic that only a life situation can bring up that will cause you to reevaluate the whole thing. But I contend that most of the time in in 30 days or less, you can evaluate somebody if you've had a couple of dates, and generally it doesn't take too many dates, 2 or 3 or 4 dates, and you can evaluate whether somebody's worth pursuing further. Most of you know that you can do this more times than not on the first date. If there's not a good connection, if there's not some chemistry, that causes the conversation to continue, and then there's no point in sticking around. And with all due respect, a lot of you ladies, and not only ladies, some guys will give it another try, and that's okay. If you want to give somebody another try, it can be nerves or whatnot, especially if they're not used to dating, and it's easy to get sucked into, okay, we went on a second date, well, that was a little better, and try to give it a couple more dates, and pretty soon you start seeing them, but deep down inside it's not right. Well, that's when you got to pull the trigger and say, no, I want to avoid the pain of being in a poor relationship, so it's time to move on. So any other thoughts, questions, ideas? It's a little bit early, but I've about said my share on the pleasure and pain principles, and if anybody has any other ideas or questions that they want me to address, I'm more than happy to do that. Again, we only do things for 2 reasons: to avoid pain or gain pleasure. And that's what in a relationship, dating should be about finding pleasure. And it's you should be able to be stimulated emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. Addie says, that's all I've got tonight. Awesome. Well, I'm glad I could help, or I hope I was helpful. But and for those of you that are afraid to break up or to end a relationship that's not working, again, the pain of the anxiety that you feel in letting go is always going to be greater up until the point that the conversation is over, and then it's a Hey Susan, thanks for joining in. Let's see what you got here. Thank you for this discussion today. I need to pull the trigger on a relationship I'm in. I have the courage to do that now. Awesome. Well, I'm awesome from the standpoint. I'm glad you have the courage. I'm sorry that you have to have that conversation, but the sooner you can have that conversation, the sooner you can move on, the sooner they can move on and ultimately find their soulmate. But Susan, again, you have to remember that this is about what's best for you. And with the anxiety, I have great anxiety when I have to end a relationship. And I've had relationships ended on me. I've been broken up with. And not that should be a surprise. And Susan says it's long overdue. Well, then time to pull that trigger and heal from that relationship, grieve the loss of the relationship. I don't know how long you've been together, but it's time to let go, grieve the loss of that relationship, and then move on and find somebody that's better for you, that's your soulmate. And that's why we're here. That's why I do this, because I want you guys to ultimately find that extraordinary relationship, and not settle. The idea of being in a marriage, in a mediocre marriage, is just heartbreaking to me, and I hope it's heartbreaking to you too, because we all go and we've all been in those relationships where it's it's just like, oh no, no. And asking my wife for a divorce was one of the hardest days of my life. But when I was done, there was a burden off of me, and it's something I'd been thinking about for a couple of years. And when I finally built the courage to have that conversation with her, my whole life started to change. It started to open things up. So anyway, Susan, I'm sorry you have to have the conversation, but I'm glad you have the courage to do it now, because now you're going to open your life up to exploring and searching for the right one. And hopefully you've learned from this situation that you're in right now that the sooner you have this conversation, the sooner you recognize that, no, this isn't feeling right. Before you get a lot of emotional energy invested and a lot of time invested in a relationship, let's just move on. It's I hate to say it this way, but I'm a big fan of cut and run. If it's not going to be a great relationship right from the beginning, and you can pretty much tell, because there's just not a lot of chemistry going on. There's not a lot of reciprocal feelings going on. There may not be. You may not feel like your partner's enhancing you. It's more of a let's do it just to see where it goes, or you're just kind of fumbling along, and it's doing it because it's convenient. I'll do this for a while because I got nobody else on the horizon, no other prospects on the horizon. That's always a terrible reason to stay with somebody. And to stay with somebody for 2, 3, 4, 5 years because, well, I've invested all this time, I don't want to give up on it now, makes it even worse. So I'm again, Susan, I'm glad you're finding the courage to make that decision and move on. And if you need any help or need any coaching, any additional coaching, it's just very simple, saying Greg or whatever his name, and I'm just pulling names out of the air. Greg, it's I'm just not feeling that this is the relationship that I'm meant to be in, and it's just I just don't feel the connection that I need for the long-term relationship I'm looking for, and let it go at that. And like I shared with Addie, you don't have to go into great explanations. It's just, no, I just don't feel that this is the right relationship. There's nothing that you've done wrong. It's, unless there's something that they really have done wrong, then say, no, you have an anger issue or you have an alcohol issue, and I'm just not equipped to deal with that. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a whatever. But that's all you have to say, and then you can move on from there, and that can be a liberating feeling too. And then you have the pleasure of, oh man, that's over. So anyway, I hope that's been helpful for all of you tonight. We'll kind of wrap it up here, unless you have a couple other questions or comments. And in the meantime, this will be the last episode from Alabama for about 7 or 8 months. I will be on my way to Texas on Friday, and I should be broadcasting from Texas next Monday. My travel schedule is kind of crazy for the next couple of weeks. So next week I'll be in Texas. The week after I will be in Kansas, and then I'll probably be there for 2 weeks, and then after that I will be in Michigan for the summer. So anyway, I appreciate you. I thank you for everybody's comments today. Thank you all for checking in, and hopefully I've given you some good help, and I'll see you all next week. Have a great and blessed week, everyone. I love you, and be back here next Monday. Put it on your calendar, 6:00, and share this with your friends and have them join in. So anyway, I love you guys. We'll see you next week.